Hey everyone, Ryan Mann here, Portfolio Manager for the TAMIM Global Tech and Innovation Fund. And today I'll provide some of our takeaways from the US election as well as its implication. So, as everyone knows by now, Trump won the US election by a meaningful margin on both the popular vote as well as the electoral vote. The American people spoke, and there's a clear mandate for change, as the pendulum had swung too far in one direction and system reform is now on the way. In addition, he will have both the House and Senate behind him, both being Republican, albeit by a narrow margin. This should help accelerate change as well as policy implementation. We believe Trump 2.0 will be quite different than Trump 1.0. For example, he now better understands the system and how things work. He definitively won the popular vote, so the demand for change is quite resounding. He's been president before. He had a respite in between to actually pause and think about what needs to be done and how to do it. He's surrounded himself with better qualified and more thoughtfully selected people, and he's prepared to hit the ground running, which you clearly see with his transition team in place and his almost daily videos about key areas of focus and who is responsible. Overall, we expect he will likely move fast, break things down early in his administration, and focus on rebuilding in the second half. He will likely push for more free markets and deregulation rather than the centrally planned system that had evolved. This likely means some short-term pain for a long-term gain setup, kind of similar to how Elon had approached Twitter after buying it. It's also quite important to understand that the domestic and international backdrop is quite different relative to his first term. For example, within the US, government debt to GDP as well as fiscal deficits are a lot higher. Inflation is a lot higher. The unemployment rate coming in is lower. Global tensions are a lot higher. And inequality and polarization are a lot worse. So with this backdrop, there's overall less policy expansion room to begin with. So as we mentioned, the first half of his administration is likely to be focused on right-sizing and reconstituting spend within the system, with an immediate shift in focusing on getting the internal domestic US situation fixed. Everything from immigration policy to healthcare to education and overall government spend. Once these foundations are laid, then leave time and space to thoughtfully handle the external later, with a likely push for ceasefire type negotiations in the meantime. So on the key focus areas, I'd say growth is going to be a major focus, but sometimes you need to grow, you need to shrink first, most notably in inefficient government spend. This is easier said than done in a levered debt-based system, but they've literally set up the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, headed by Elon and Vivek, to focus on this. We think growth will likely come from a deep focus on the supply side, which is a bit different than what we've been focused on for the past decade or two. This involves things like deregulation, reprivatization of industries and jobs, and a push for abundant and cheap energy at the base layer, which filters through everything else. All of this paired with a clear focus on investment in technology, most notably AI, for growth, productivity, as well as national security, as defense streams directly down from technology leadership. Overall, we think stage one will likely be a combination of deficit reductions and a reallocation of where fiscal funds flow, which I frankly think the mainstream media has quite wrong. They're calling for massive deficit blowouts, and I don't think that's going to be the situation. So you combine this right sizing with the aforementioned supply side reforms, this will help rebuild the foundation of the system and increase potential GDP and productivity. You can then follow this eventually with demand side as you need it down the road. Overall, it seems the Trump administration intimately understands our pillars of power. So let's invest in technology for productivity, growth, and defense. Let's grow the pie. Let's invest in energy to lower the price and enable an acceleration of the above investments in technology. And let's think more about the potential restructuring of money, potentially using new technologies, maybe blockchain, and partially to enable reshoring as well as resilience of the US and the global West. So drilling down into some of the sectors that we think are going to be directly impacted, starting with defense. We think Trump does understand deterrence, and he's also surrounding himself with people who think about creative, positive sum solutions to problems rather than the prior scarcity, zero sum mindset that had plagued many prior administrations. On the spend side, we would expect a big focus on reforming the prime contracts system, shifting to a more competitive structure. So an analogy here would be SpaceX. So Elon and team really drove a paradigm shift in aerospace with fixed price contracts and faster, more iterative development. Defense contracting likely follows a similar transformation. And you're already starting to see that with companies like Anduril moving that way. And this should help drive efficiencies within spend for defense. On the technology front, obviously something we are intimately focused on. This ties directly into defense and deterrence, most notably around the artificial intelligence ecosystem and having a leadership position there. So we'd expect a removal of barriers and constraints within the system to allow for faster investment, movement, and innovation within the space. For example, you can imagine an acceleration in permitting for autonomous vehicle testing. And overall, I think just more rational conversations versus the ingrained bureaucratic red tape. If you want some of that, just Google Elon Musk, SpaceX, whales, and sharks. Some form of open source AI will likely also be a focus, with also a big angle around safety. And finally, I wouldn't be surprised to see a sovereign wealth fund launched within the US with a particular focus on investing in critical technologies. And this is something we had mentioned before. On the energy front, I think the administration knows that without energy, you don't have industry. You're seeing that, frankly, right now with Germany. So we think investment here will accelerate, and it essentially has to enable the build out of AI data centers, to enable reshoring, reindustrialization. So that reducing the cost, increasing the abundance of energy is going to be a prime focus. We'll also likely see a removal of some of the subsidies around EV to let the market dictate and the natural forces flow. So we think this actually implicitly will make Tesla stronger and everyone else weaker because they have the lowest cost structure. We would refer you to the Tesla update for a little bit more information there. Also on the energy front, we would think permitting for things like nuclear will happen faster. And overall, we think oil and natural gas, along with nuclear, will likely be the energy bridge to eventually a more solar-based system down the road. And then finally, areas like healthcare, food, education, we would expect pretty massive reforms across the board here, with the former two likely headed by RFK, who we think in general will play a fairly prominent role within the administration. Jumping into a couple of topics that are top of mind for us, reshoring. So rather than onshoring or nearshoring, we think actual direct US reshoring and the reindustrialization will accelerate under Trump. This will likely be helped with tariff sticks along with deregulation and some potential investment guidelines. This overall, if you want to reshore, it's going to force an acceleration in spend on automation and robots, which now, frankly, are a lot more viable than 5 years ago, given the step function improvements we've seen in large language models and artificial intelligence. On the M&A topic, we expect areas just like M&A broadly to pick back up. Immigration, so immigration reform is highly likely. Step one will likely just be closing the border to stem illegal immigration, followed by likely new policies on the actual legal process of immigration. And overall, I would think and hope that the administration recognizes the importance of immigrants to the development and growth of the US, but rather than allowing basically reckless illegal immigration, you shift towards a more streamlined legal process. So for example, enabling foreigners who graduate from US colleges a path to citizenship seems like some relatively low-hanging fruit to start with. On the markets front, if we do pull back absolute fiscal spend and stop immigration in the short term, and you pair that with tariffs for negotiating leverage, we would expect increased market volatility in 2025, which frankly we think will create plenty of opportunities under the surface. On the team front, this is actually probably where we're most excited about the opportunity ahead. He's still announcing his cabinet and the like, but it's pretty clear that he's surrounded himself with a better group than his first term. And I think the US leadership was immediately recognized by the rest of the world as both stronger and more credible than before because of this team. And I think that has partially been supported by the move in the US dollar you've seen since the election. So not all of these people are confirmed, but people like Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Scott Bessent, RFK, even maybe Naval, they're all a formidable group of high quality thinkers and doers. And they're actively taking responsibility to help, frankly, improve the system, the country, and hopefully the world. So we would expect a focus from all of them on first principles thinking, a long-term growth mindset, and positive sum outcomes. Jumping into the world, we think overall the implications and the results of some of these policies will probably make for a bit of a bumpy road. Similar to the Cold War era, we'd expect tariffs to primarily be used most punitively against our perceived opponents, so China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. The implementation of the tariffs will likely be gradual until certain proposed best practices around global trade and otherwise are adopted by these countries. So until you abide by X set of rules, tariffs continue to be put in place and likely increase. We also expect some pressure on allies like Germany to pick up, likely around picking up their spend on defense and just overall burden sharing. On the current wars, as I had mentioned before, given the internal then external focus, he may push for more immediate resolutions, structured more as an agree to disagree, like we've seen in prior conflicts around the world. And this would allow a refocusing of energy internally, but still TBD on this. Maybe this is just for Ukraine while the Middle East continues. Overall, I think a show of strength and deterrence while we rebuild seems to be the broader theme. Jumping to China, which obviously is an elephant in the room, we think he's going to put tariffs on specific companies to get deals done. So, for example, force companies like BYD to build factories in the US, share IP, and do JVs with US companies. And in response, they would get access to the US market. This is similar to what China did to US companies in China. And it would be a way for China to naturally recycle dollars into the US, while simultaneously giving the US some leverage over China in the future. On the domestic front, I think within the US, peak polarity is now in, which is a positive thing to say, given how far apart both sides had become. And over the next decade, I think we'll see a move towards unity. What we see within the system now is quite characteristic of past fourth turnings as characterized by Neil Howe. So you see trust in the media, education, government, system at all-time lows. Inequality, all-time highs. Lifespans are actually shrinking, and as you can tell, attention spans in many cases are certainly at all-time lows. So we think the pendulum had swung way too far, but the process of restoring balance is just beginning. So jumping into the implications for Confluence, the Global Tech and Innovation Fund, we expect market volatility likely rises under a Trump administration, given how much change is likely to happen. But that also comes commensurate with a significant rise in opportunities. And our overall focus areas of technology, energy, and money remain the same. We frankly built this fund for this situation. And now we can more confidently hone in on sub-themes within each of those pillars. We think the Trump administration understands these three pillars of power, and as I've highlighted, they're clearly directly focused on all of them. So with Elon, one of the smartest and most innovative leaders in the world in there, we'd expect change to happen relatively fast. And our job within all of this is to make money and help potentially accelerate this positive change. And with all of this change, frankly, we're generally more weary of concentrated indices and believe this restructuring of the system sets up for an amazing opportunity for active management. That is active management that has a clear understanding of history and a process that is repeatable and able to capitalize on this change. So with all of that, I'll wrap and look forward to more updates soon.